Welcome back for day 2 of the Zoey Sewalong. Just to get started, let's go ahead and prep our machine, fill your bobbin, change out your sewing machine needle for one that is stretch and preferably a brand new one, and then go ahead and thread your machine and be ready to start sewing. Although you can sew the Zoey up partly on your serger, I do recommend using your sewing machine as much as possible, just for accuracy. I use a zigzag stitch with the width of about 0.5 millimeters and a length of about 2.5 millimeters. Now it's time to start attaching our bands. We're going to start with the back. So you'll need your back piece, and then you'll also want your back band. If you are using the Heat and Bond soft stretch, you're going to go ahead and take off the paper backing before you proceed. Start by matching up the center back double notch of both the back piece and then also the back band with right sides touching, pin there, and then also find the two ends, match those up and get those pins as well. You'll notice that the band is slightly smaller than the back neckline, so you're going to need to stretch it to fit in between those pins and then add another pin in the middle. Once it's all pinned, we're going to go back over to our sewing machine, and using that stretch stitch, we are going to stitch the entire back neckline at 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. You're going to slightly stretch your fabric as it goes so that it lays flat and matches up. Now it's time to press. We'll start by pressing that seam allowance all up and towards the band and away from the garment. And then you're going to bring down that folded edge from the front of the band, and then you're going to make sure that it slightly covers that stitching line that you just made. So that whole seam allowance and the whole band will be completely encased now. Continue to carefully do this all the way around the band. You're going to see that because I am using the Heat and Bond soft stretch, I don't need to be using pins, but if you're not using it, you will just be pinning it instead of fusing that fusible web to keep it in place. The more careful you are when you are prepping the band in this way, the easier it is going to be to go ahead and attach your strap. This is what the back looks like, and this is what the front looks like. So now we're going to go back over to our sewing machine, and we are going to stitch right along that folded edge, the bottom folded edge, with the right side facing up, and then you'll be catching that other folded edge on the underside underneath as you're sewing. I find it easiest to line up that bottom folded edge with the inside of my presser foot, so that keeps my needle maybe a 1/16 to 1/8 of an inch inside of that folded edge and keeps everything really nice and neat and tidy, and ensures that I'm catching that fold on the underside as well. And here it is. This is what it should look like now. It's a good idea to go ahead and use the steam on your iron to give it a good press at this point. This will kind of bring in the neckline if it got stretched out a bit during sewing. And here's the wrong side as well. So you can see how that stitching just barely caught the folded edge of the band on the back side as well. Now that the back is done, we're going to move on to the front, and we're going to attach the front band in a very similar way as the back. Make sure you have your front and also your front band. Take off the paper backing of the Heat and Bond Soft Stretch if you're using it. And then you're going to find the single notch at the bottom of your band, and you're going to match it up to the bottom of the V on your front and pin them right sides touching. And then just like you did for the back, pin the top points together. And if you want, you can go ahead and stretch the band to fit the neckline and put more pins in between. I'm just going to stretch as I sew this time because I find that pretty easy to do. Now we're going to go over to our sewing machine, and using that same stretch stitch, we're going to stitch all along that front neckband. When you get to that center V, you're going to pull it straight like I'm showing here and just sew straight across. And this is what it will look like once it's sewn. Flip it over so that it's wrong side facing up, and just like you did for the back, we're going to pull that band down and around, and we're going to press all those seam allowances up so that they are encased in the band. And you're going to either fuse using the Heat and Bond Soft Stretch or pin that bottom folded edge along the back side so that it slightly covers the stitching line that you just made. Once again, like I said before, the more careful and precise you are during this step, the easier the rest is going to go and the more professional it's going to look in the end. When you get to the portion of the center V, just pull it kind of straight. There will be a little extra fabric up at the top. Don't worry about that. We will be taking care of that later. Just kind of pull it as straight as possible and keep on pinning and pressing. Once the front is all prepped, we're going to go back over to our sewing machine, and we're going to stitch with our stretch stitch right along that folded edge on the right side of our front. When you get to the area that is the center front V, you're just going to slightly pull it so that you can stitch straight. Okay, now that that is all sewn up, we're going to fold it in half with right sides touching, matching up your neckline edges. If you're sewing up view C, which is the dress view, be extra careful that you fold it right where that center front seam is. We're going to make a stitch that is 3/8 of an inch from that front corner, and then it's going to stitch down and it's going to end right at that top stitching line that we just made. You're going to change your machine stitch to a straight stitch, and you're going to bring down the stitch length to about 1.5 millimeters. So once again, we're starting at 3/8 of an inch in along that top edge, and just stitching straight down, taking out a little wedge, ending at that top stitching line, and back stitch at both ends. It'll look something like this. If there's a little pucker at the bottom of the V, it is because you stitched down too far and didn't end at that top stitching line. So it should look like this when you're done. Now return back to your ironing board. We're going to take that little wedge and we are going to use our iron and some steam to press it towards one side so you have a nice crisp line there and a really good V at center front. This is a good time to just give everything a nice final press. Use steam in your iron to kind of reshape that center front neckline in case it got stretched out during sewing. And you have your back piece as well, and we are all ready for tomorrow where we will attach the straps.